In his mind, Charles instantly sentenced Connor to death. In his previous life, Connor had caused Charles so much misery and cost him so many opportunities to grow. If he had not advanced so slowly in the early stages, would his family have experienced tragedy after tragedy? Connor had caused the people around him to die one after another. Charles wouldn't kill him quickly. He wanted Connor to die in pain and despair. Charles began to drift into sleep. The students chatted with a group of muscular men. They learned that the men had been personal trainers in a gym, and the students relaxed their guard even more. The next morning at 4 o'clock, the sun had not risen yet, but the sky was already bright. Charles woke up Alice, who was still in a daze, and said, "Ladybug, wake up. It's time to go." Alice sleepily complained, "I still want to sleep a little longer." She had been worn out the previous night, and the culprit was this intractable man in front of her. Now the bastard had woken her up without showing any mercy. Charles threatened, "If you don't get up, I'll leave by myself." "No," Alice screamed, and got up immediately. Being left behind by Charles was her greatest fear. When Charles used this threat, she would listen to anything. Charles regretted scaring her. However, he was not a person who would apologize. He could only be more careful in the future. Then Charles woke up the sleeping classmates in the supermarket and said, "We should go." The students were unhappy to be woken up. When they saw Charles's face, they did not dare to complain. The gym rats and Connor also woke up. When he saw Charles, Connor's eyes filled with fear. One of the muscular men saw that Connor was afraid of Charles, so he said to him, "Does he have a grudge against you? Do you want us to help you teach him a lesson?" "No," Connor said with a fierce look in his eyes. "He is strong, but there are many ways to deal with him. We need to use our wisdom to handle him, like we did with those guys from the army." The muscular man sneered, "It's a good idea to not kill him. The road ahead is not easy to walk. It'll be helpful to have someone help us move things. Last night, a swarm of monstrous insects came through the area. They destroyed all the cars nearby, including ours." Others from the group chimed in, "There's a limit to how much we can carry. It's good to have someone share the burden. How about this? We won't have to go around looking for food. Those girls are pretty good. It should be easy for them to get their hands on things. If they don't know how to appreciate favors, then just force them. Anyway, in this era, no one cares what we do anymore." Charles looked at the front of his car. When he found that the engine had been destroyed by the mutated insects, his face darkened. Had he really lost the car? Could it be that he had to walk again? In truth, he did not care too much. If the car was gone, then so be it. After Charles filled his backpack, he brought Alice and Sister Bethany out and called to the classmates, "Carry these things and follow us." The students did not dare to disobey and quickly started moving. A female classmate asked one of the muscular men, "Where's the refugee camp you mentioned?" He replied, "We only know a general direction, which is the same direction he's going." Aaron felt that these people were suspicious, but they did not do anything untoward, so he did not worry too much. Moreover, with Charles around, they shouldn't pose any threat, right? After 2 hours of trekking, no one could bear the burden of the supplies they carried anymore. Unfortunately, Charles did not give any indication of stopping the rest. Therefore, they could only grit their teeth and keep up. One of the muscular men said earnestly to the girls, "Let us help you carry your stuff for a while." The girls said gratefully, "That's great, we're almost exhausted." When the male students saw this, they felt a little sour. After another hour, they could not take it anymore. Their physical strength was good, but they could not endure such total fatigue. The girls began to collectively protest, saying, "Can't we take a break? I'm exhausted. We need to rest." Seeing that Charles did not intend to stop, a muscular man came up to him and blocked his way. "Can't you see that these girls have reached their limit?" The corner of Charles's mouth raised in a faint sneer. "What does it matter to me? If they want to follow me, they have to keep up." Hearing this, a few of the other muscular men put down their backpacks and surrounded Charles. Since he was the leader of the students, after they taught the punk a lesson, the classmates would obediently fall in line. The leader of the gym group showed off his muscles and said, "Let me ask you, as a man, if you can't even take care of these girls, what kind of man are you? If you keep walking, then I'll teach you what a real man is." As he spoke, he threw a punch with all his strength at Charles. Charles easily caught his fist. The muscle man bellowed, "Everyone, attack together!" Charles clenched his fist tightly. A shrill scream came from the man. "Ah!" He retracted his fist, feeling as if it had been crushed by a monstrous claw. The other muscular men were about to attack Charles when the screams of the girls suddenly came from behind them. "Ah! What is this?" they cried. They followed the girls' line of sight and discovered that they were surrounded by a group of crimson-red mosquitoes. Although they didn't quite amount to a swarm, they were all half a foot long. They had sharp protruding mouths that quivered as the insects surrounded the party. Charles's eyes were full of expectation when he saw the creatures. Monster mosquitoes. All of them had encountered many monsters before. They wouldn't let their guard down against these scary-looking mosquitoes. The mosquitoes swarmed a student who tried to escape. They cut off his legs and devoured him. "Ah!" the student screamed. Witnessing the horrific scene, the other students could only shrink into terrified balls. Although Charles could have saved the student, he would not tolerate people who ran away when they were in danger. He watched coldly as the mosquitoes consumed the teen. A fierce look bloomed in Connor's eyes. He pushed a female classmate toward the mosquitoes and called to the muscular men, "Push them into the swarm and we can live." The eyes of the muscular men flashed with excitement. "Good idea," they agreed. They turned their eyes to Charles. "Let's attack together," the muscular men yelled. The men rushed forward, trying to push Charles into the swarm of bloodthirsty mosquitoes. Alice panicked. She produced a water screen shield in front of Charles, causing the muscular men to hesitate. Superpowered people, a muscular man wondered. Alice's ability made them nervous. However, their anxiety only fueled their fierceness. They muttered, "So what if she's a paranormal? Can she deal with monsters? Attack together! Kill them all!" If they didn't think of a way to escape the mosquitoes, they would die. Even the presence of a paranormal couldn't divert their survival instincts. Connor moved closer to the muscular men. He was afraid that the angry classmates would try to push him into the swarm in retaliation. The students behind him looked at each other, their eyes full of doubt. They did not know if their classmates would choose to sacrifice them to survive. Just as Connor's group was about to attack Charles suddenly kicked the crotch of the closest bodybuilder. Ugh! The man's vital parts took a critical hit, bending him over in pain. The monster mosquitoes grew closer and closer. A strange force suddenly emanated from Charles's body, causing the swarm to disperse. Suppression Talisman. The Essence Talisman's greatest power was to increase an enemy's gravity. It made the enemy feel as if a heavy burden was weighing them down. It was the nemesis of speed-based warriors. Connor had quietly circled behind Charles. A cruel smile appeared on his face. Back in school, he had been jealous of Charles's ability. Now he finally had the chance to deal with him once and for all. "Be careful," Sister Bethany shouted to Charles. Connor shoved Charles forward, intending to feed him to the swarm. He stopped when he suddenly realized that he was pushing a mountain. "Do you think you have a chance?" Charles sneered. He grabbed Connor's neck and coldly threw him into the swarm. "Help!" Connor screamed. "Charles, you will die horribly!" "Shut your mouth," Charles snapped. Charles used an ice talisman to seal Connor's mouth and watched the mosquitoes eat him. To prevent him from escaping as he had before, he kicked Connor's knee, shattering it. Nothing is more satisfying than taking an eye for an eye, Charles thought. With grim satisfaction, Charles watched Connor die. Scenes from his past life flickered through his mind, filling his face with dark joy and giddy cruelty. Seeing this, fear flashed across the faces of the muscular men. This person was too terrifying. They cursed Connor for making such a terrifying person their enemy. One of them seized Sister Bethany. "First to live, go to hell," he yelled. He pushed hard, and the nun was flung to the ground. Instantly, the mosquitoes crawled all over her body. When they did, the air cleared. The muscular man who had thrown Bethany to the ground ordered, "Take advantage of the moment!" The rest of the men seized the opportunity and hurriedly escaped through the gap. Why is it like this? Bethany thought. Her eyes were filled with confusion. She only lived to serve God. Why did she suffer the dangers of the mortal world again and again? Why was she treated like this? Were there only demons left? Her heart was filled with despair. Alice used her water power to try to hold the mosquitoes back from Bethany. Unfortunately, at this stage of Alice's development, she wasn't very successful. Cold light flashed in Charles's eyes. Flying daggers appeared in his hands as he filled his body with the innate sword energy. "None of you will escape," Charles promised. Swoosh! Swoosh! A whistling sound cut through the air, followed by a series of miserable screams as the flying daggers pierced the knees of the muscle men. They fell to the ground and struggled to crawl forward. Charles moved to save Bethany, but stopped when a powerful light suddenly erupted from her body. She stood up from the ground. A pair of wings spread out from her back, making her look incomparably holy. In contrast, her eyes had lost the kindness and naivety they had reflected in the past. They had become cold and merciless. Charles asked Bethany, "What do you want to do with them?" The men immediately begged for mercy, crying, "Spare us! We just want to live! I beg you to be merciful! Please, spare us!" The smartest among them cried, "Look at your clothes. You're a nun, right? God teaches you to be merciful and tolerant." Before, he might have succeeded with his plea. But now, Bethany said coldly, "Your hearts have been filled with darkness. You are degenerates. You should go to hell. You are not worthy of the mercy of God." As she spoke, a holy light spilled from her hands, piercing the chest of the man who had pushed her into the mosquito swarm. Charles smiled coldly. "You made the right choice." It is said that quiet people's anger is the most terrifying because they suffer so much before letting it erupt. So it was with Sister Bethany. She had been too devout in the past. There had only been room in her heart for faith in God. Under the missionary's tutelage, she had forgotten her own name in the depths of her devotion. Even now, she had not completely lost her faith. The difference was, where she had once believed in the good and beautiful aspects of human nature, she now felt only despair toward evil people. She no longer believed that all people had the right to be saved. These people's hearts were filled with darkness. She could only use her paranormal holy light to purify them. Charles used bone spurs to absorb the dead men's flesh. Then he harvested the sated mosquitoes and refined and devoured them one by one. As he worked, he asked Bethany, "Do you still believe in God now? Do you still want to save this world?" Bethany said firmly, "I believe that what my master is doing will save this world. Your path must be the right path." She believed that Charles would save the people who deserved to live, and he would kill those who deserved to die. Charles approved of her response, which was akin to fanaticism. If he could stand at the peak of humanity and make up for all the regrets of his previous life, he might consider becoming a savior. After all, he and his family still had to live in this world. If she now took Charles as her guiding light, then he might as well take advantage of the situation. The use of a loyal paranormal would be a great help to him. Why should he care about the details? So he said to Bethany, "Since you have forgotten your previous name, I will give you a new name. Your name is Sylvia." Alice mumbled, "I still think of you as Bethany." Charles said, "Call her whatever you want." Sylvia lowered her head and said, "I will obey Master's orders." The missionary had told her that her past name had no meaning. Now she only had one name left, and that was Sylvia, the servant of God, the maid of the path of cultivation. She felt as if she had been reborn. There were 9 students remaining, 5 males and 4 females. Witnessing Charles's cruelty, their hearts were filled with fear. However, there was now another kind of emotion growing inside of them. Charles called out to them, "Pick up your things and follow me." "Okay." The students immediately perked up and followed him. They seemed more enthusiastic than before. Alice was puzzled. Why did they seem excited? I thought that your little demonstration just now would scare them. It had certainly scared her. The students were indeed more afraid of Charles, but in addition to that fear, there was an additional layer of inexplicable excitement. Charles explained, "Human nature is a very strange thing to begin with. They know that good people will not harm them, but they are more willing to follow evil and cruel people because they hope to win their favor and avoid their abuse." Alice was silent. Her naivety did not mean that she was stupid. She quickly sorted out her thoughts. Because good people were harmless, others were not afraid of them. Even if they became enemies with such people, they would have little to fear. On the contrary, it was people like Charles that they did not dare to provoke. Even if Charles treated them coldly, they would not feel wronged. Instead, they would feel a strange excitement, a perverse desire for Charles to approve of them. Looking at the silent Alice, Charles said, "Perhaps you look down on these people, but you can't. If we want to establish a force, they and others like them will make the best subordinates. It's just that we must not develop feelings for them. They are subordinates, and we must never allow them to be friends." To him, Miranda Ellington was a friend. Denny Peters, Calvin Bell, and Tony Cranston were his friends. They had fought side by side. Even if only once, it had still formed an intimate bond. He did not want Neil as a friend. He treated him as an equal, but kept him at arm's length. He would never show the students behind him such respect because he was proud, cold, and believed that respect could only be earned. After walking for a while longer, Charles shouted, "Stop and rest." The students groaned in relief. A few girls flopped onto the dirty ground, unconcerned about their appearance. They groaned, "Great, we can finally rest. My aching legs." Their respite was short-lived. Charles immediately said in a cold tone, "You are not allowed to sit down. Don't you have any common sense? Rub each other's legs. Otherwise they'll grow too sore to continue. If you can't keep up with my rhythm, don't blame me for leaving you guys behind." "Yes, sir," the students agreed. When the students heard Charles threaten to leave them, they shivered and began rubbing their legs. They had learned this in physical education class, but they had discounted the practice as useless. Now that they were on this brutal march, they realized that some common wisdom from their old lives could be of great use. Charles said to Sylvia, "Bethany, treat them." He was satisfied with the students' progress. Since he had decided to take them on, it was prudent to prevent them from becoming a burden. He would teach them power artist cultivation techniques. He could not be too good to them all at once, or they would expect such treatment in the future. Sylvia nodded. She shined the holy light on the students' bodies, making them moan with relief. Alice said doubtfully, "Didn't you give her a new name? Sylvia? It's quite nice. Why did you forget it just now?" Charles coughed dryly and said, "What's the difference?" They were used to calling the nun Bethany, but the name has a special meaning for its owner. Sylvia's name made her feel like a unique, independent person, not just a mere tool. After resting for a while, everyone moved forward again. Although they encountered some dangers along the way, there were now 3 paranormals in the group. Ordinary dangers were nothing to them, and light-powered paranormals had the ability to purify contaminated crystal cores. Therefore, Sylvia's and Alice's strength had improved steadily along the way. As an early awakened, Alice's talent was formidable. She was now able to use ice blades, but she had not yet mastered the technique. When she did, her water power would increase by another level and become more useful as a weapon. When the students grew so tired that they couldn't walk anymore, they took the initiative to ask for assistance from Sylvia. They begged, "Sister, help me. We're about to die. I beg you, please help us." Even though they were all very humble, Charles still refused their request. "The energy of a paranormal is very precious. We don't have time to waste on these trivial matters. If you really can't hold on any longer, you can drop out at any time." The students immediately stopped complaining and began massaging one another's legs again. Charles couldn't help but sneer a little. Humans were like this. If they were given an inch, they would push their luck. Their bodies had not reached their limits yet. It was just the lazy nature of humans that was causing trouble. If they couldn't overcome this bit of inertia, what did he want them for? He recruited subordinates to serve him, not be coddled by him. Even so, during the break, Charles gave Alice a massage. While rubbing her sore muscles, he explained some techniques and acupuncture points. He deliberately let the students watch and listen. A girl said in a low voice, "Actually, he's not that bad. Although he has strict requirements for us, he's still very good to us. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let us hear this." Another girl chimed in, "That's right. We can't always rely on paranormals. He deliberately taught us something because he wants us to live." After suffering Charles's cold attitude, his actions made the students feel warm in their hearts. This was true caring, sharing a technique that allowed them to survive. Aaron sighed, but he didn't say anything. He saw through Charles's intentions. To put it bluntly, it was the carrot and the stick. But he did not dare to say it openly. Daylight lasted 3 hours longer than it had the previous day. Although the abrupt change was very strange, everyone was already used to it. Seeing that the sky was about to turn dark, Charles planned to find a place to rest. In fact, he had found a tent when he had collected supplies. However, he did not intend to expose his spatial ability to these people right now. Usually when he summoned flying daggers with this ability, he let people think that he was merely skilled at hiding weapons. Producing a tent would only expose this secret power. Aaron's eyes suddenly lit up, and he pointed ahead. "Look, there's a big tent!" A girl thought of something. Could this be the refugee camp that those muscular men mentioned? They had been scum, but this did not mean that the refugee camp they had mentioned did not exist. And living in tents would be much preferable to staying out in the open. Everyone looked at Charles, awaiting his decision. Charles nodded. Then he said, "Be careful." After getting his approval, the impatient students rushed to the camp. Charles stayed behind, his eyes cold and disappointed. It had been so many days since the apocalypse, but it still played out like this. When people saw a place that looked like a camp, they couldn't wait to rush over. They thought that the world was filled with good people, and that they would be greeted with warm hospitality. A bedraggled man staggered out of the camp. A student asked with concern, "Excuse me, is this a refugee camp?" The man's cloudy eyes lit up. "I want to eat! I want to eat!" A female classmate immediately took out a pack of biscuits and a bottle of water from her backpack. She was about to pass these things to the man when her body suddenly froze. She lowered her head and widened her eyes to look down at her abdomen. The handle of a small knife protruded from it. She'd only wanted to give the pitiful person some food and water. She hadn't expected gratitude, but there was no need to kill her. Even as she fell to the ground, her eyes remained wide open, filled with disbelief. The bedraggled man didn't show any signs of weakness now. He snatched the girl's backpack, then shouted toward the camp, "They have food!" Immediately, a group of people in ragged clothes rushed out from the camp. They were armed with iron sticks and knives. Their eyes shone with a predatory light, as if they were hungry wolves who had been starving for weeks. They saw the students and the backpacks they were carrying. They yelled, "Food! Where is it?" "It's here! It's in their bags!" They immediately rushed toward the group in depraved excitement. The male student who was closest to the camp was knifed in the neck. Blood gushed out like a fountain. "Ah!" he screamed. The students were shocked by the sudden turn of events and scattered in all directions in complete panic. 2 female students ran in Charles's direction. 3 daggers appeared in Charles's hand. However, his gaze did not fall on the ragged-looking man who was chasing after the students. Instead, it fell on the bedraggled man who had stolen the backpack from the student he had killed. Alice and Sylvia would save the 2 girls. Hence, he turned all his attention on the stolen goods. Although the supplies in his storage space were enough for the 3 of them to eat for 6 months, resources could never be squandered. Any item would increase in value over time. Just as he was about to make his move, he suddenly stopped, seeing his intervention was unnecessary. The bedraggled man clutched the backpack. He was filled with excitement. This was indeed a refugee camp, but most of the refugees had already been taken away. These were the ones who had been abandoned because they had bullied others too much. Although the army had left some food for them, it was long since gone. Now someone had delivered the goods to their doorstep. The man was beside himself with glee. When he saw the backpack on the female classmate's body, he had not hesitated to kill her for it. To prevent her angry classmates from beating him to death, he had shouted to the others in the camp and turned their attention to the students. It had all worked out just as he had planned. But after walking a few steps, he bumped into someone. "Go to hell," the man snarled. The instinct born of squabbling over scraps made him react quickly. He stabbed blindly at the person in his way. No matter who it was, they would die if they tried to take his spoils. Clang! He looked at the dagger in his hand in astonishment, finding it broken in 2. When he raised his head again, he saw a zombie with a silver luster to its skin. Its body was as hard as steel. A knife was unable to harm it in the slightest. It parted its sharp teeth and grabbed the man with two powerful large hands, bringing him to its mouth. "No!" The bedraggled man screamed violently, and then he didn't make another sound. His shrill scream didn't attract anyone's attention. The rest of the people were either fighting fiercely or running for their lives. Following the lead of the two female students, two male students ran toward Charles. When there was danger, there was no place safer than by Charles's side. Although Alice and Sylvia had experienced both the coldness and warmth of human nature, their own natures had not changed so quickly. They felt that since these students had become part of their group, they still needed to help when they could. Charles did not stop them. With them playing defense, Charles could focus more on killing. The flying daggers flew from his hand. Carrying the power of the innate sword energy, they killed 3 of the abandoned refugees on the spot. A few more daggers appeared in Charles's hands. He liked the innate sword energy more and more now. In a single target attack, the technique consumed the least energy and was the easiest to activate. The flying daggers tore through the air, ripping away the lives of the vagabonds. Item controlling talisman. Ordinarily, he had planned to use this move to power the flying daggers, but now he used it to retrieve the flying daggers that he had already thrown. After a flying dagger returned, it flew out of his hand once again, killing more of the marauders. Charles had thought that Aaron might be a talent that could be molded, but just now, when he had encountered danger, he had pushed a classmate into the path of a vagabond, then turned around and fled. Charles could understand sacrificing a classmate in a life and death situation, but understanding did not mean that he could forgive. To prevent himself from becoming the next person to be sacrificed, it was best to get rid of this kind of person as soon as possible. More importantly, Aaron hadn't run toward Charles. This meant that he did not believe in Charles as a leader. Even if Aaron possessed a talent that could be molded, Charles did not have time to slowly train him. It would be better to kill him and recruit someone else. In less than 20 seconds, under the joint attack of Charles and Alice, all the vagabonds were killed. Except for those who had run to Charles, the rest of the students had been killed. Charles's eyes turned to the zombie that shone with a metallic silver luster. Iron zombie, another rare breed, Charles said. He was accustomed to encountering rare species of monsters. An iron zombie, because of some kind of mutation, had an outer skin that was as hard as steel. Its fatal weakness was its slow movement. Therefore, when one encountered this kind of zombie, they ran if they could. Today's situation was an exception, because Charles wanted to verify the power of the innate sword energy. There was another reason. The students, including Alice, were already very tired. If he didn't get rid of this iron zombie, they might not be able to escape its tireless advance, no matter how slow it was. As Charles was preparing to fight the iron zombie, he heard movement coming from the camp. Charles said to Alice, "Prepare for danger. Something seems to be coming. I'll get rid of this zombie." With that, he rushed toward the creature. "Be careful," Alice instinctively cautioned him, her heart full of worry. Sylvia said, "Master's order is to guard against the danger around us. We do not want to drag him down." Alice nodded and calmed herself. Her concern was too chaotic. Charles did not need her to worry. Moreover, reality was not a romance drama. She had to guard against becoming a burden to Charles. Therefore, the calmer she was right now, the more effective she would be. The iron zombie was still eating the corpses of the abandoned refugees. When zombies without intelligence ate, they were at their least prepared. Many vicious people took advantage of this to sacrifice others in exchange for an opportunity to attack a zombie. When Charles rushed toward the zombie, bone spurs had replaced the weapon in his hand. The innate sword energy's power poured from the spurs. Because the speed of the infusion was too great, cracks began to appear along his right arm. Blood flowed from the cracks. The innate sword energy's power was getting stronger and stronger, and the injuries to his arm were getting more and more severe. "I've reached my limit. I can't grow any stronger," Charles thought. He stopped just in time. Carrying the innate sword energy's power, he stabbed toward the iron zombie. Charles and the iron zombie clashed, but there was no sound. The innate sword energy's power surpassed the limits of any physical body's endurance. With the help of the bone spurs, Charles easily pierced through the iron zombie's head and took its life. So strong. Even Charles was shocked by the terrifying power of the innate sword energy. Although he hadn't expected it to be much trouble to kill the iron zombie, he had pierced through its steel-like skin and the skull, which was harder than steel, like a knife through warm butter. He had not felt the slightest resistance. Seeing Charles easily dispatch the iron zombie, the remaining students heaved a sigh of relief. However, before they could celebrate, Charles shouted anxiously, "Help me treat my arm." Alice and Sylvia were stunned. They activated their healing techniques and focused on Charles's arm, alleviating much of the pain. Charles could stand the pain. His urgency came from a feeling that there was still danger nearby. A female student pointed at him and shouted crazily, "Why didn't we encounter so many dangers before we met you? Did you attract these monsters?" Not everyone could be strong when facing adversity. After surpassing the limit of their endurance, anyone could collapse. People had died one after another in front of her. Her friendly classmates had become cold corpses in an instant, causing her to mentally collapse. So what if she challenged Charles? The worst he could do was kill her. Her mind was in free fall, and she couldn't think clearly. In this moment of crisis, all she could do was vent her emotions. The remaining 3 students silently watched her tantrum. They were also afraid of the endless number of monsters. They didn't know when they would collapse, or if they might become stronger instead. Watching their classmate raving, they seemed to be vicariously venting their emotions as well. Alice nervously looked at Charles. She silently prayed in her heart, "Don't kill anymore." Regarding the deaths of some people, she was without sympathy. But these were her classmates, and she was still worried about them. Unexpectedly, Charles did not seem angry. Instead, he said calmly, "You were right. I am the one who caused all the dangers you encountered." Everyone was shocked by Charles's words. They did not know what he was talking about. Charles calmly walked toward them and said, "Maybe you will encounter less danger if you act alone. If you think it is too dangerous to stay by my side, you can leave now." Leave? The few of them were dumbfounded. Even the female classmate who had accused Charles couldn't bear the idea. Charles raised his eyebrows and said, "Am I not clear enough? You haven't done anything to ease my burdens. If you feel that it is too dangerous to follow me, then we'll have to go our separate ways. You can take with you as much as you can carry. This is the best I can do. Are you still not satisfied?" The students were speechless. They felt as if their brains were short-circuiting. Charles's argument was flawless. They were the ones who had insisted on following him. They had not done anything for him. Instead, Charles, who had always been coldly self-involved, had helped them in the face of danger. And they were still in danger. How could they blame Charles? Wasn't it because they had acted on their own and were unprepared that a tragedy occurred? Finally, not only had Charles allowed them to leave, he had also allowed them to take as many resources as they could. Charles owed them nothing. A boy stammered. She was just short-sighted. She did not mean any harm." "I can understand you guys," Charles said, "but you have to understand me. I never asked you to come. If you want to leave, I won't ask you to stay." Charles's words left them deep in their thoughts. They looked around at the dark environment and at the dead bodies on the ground. This world was too dangerous. Even if they hadn't encountered Charles, even if the people in the gym hadn't had any ill intentions, would they really have been able to survive after coming to this refugee camp? In fact, they were able to survive solely because of Charles. With their limited survival skills, they wouldn't be able to last for long in any one place, unless the Messiah could build a safe fortress. Even if Charles had killed their classmates, which ones had he killed? Pamela Williams? She had tried to incite her classmates to mutiny. Aaron Taylor. The leadership he had displayed was impressive, but he had pushed his classmates toward the enemy in exchange for a chance to escape. Charles had helped them take revenge. No matter how cold Charles acted, he never had let them down. A male classmate lowered his head and said, "Sir, she definitely did not mean it. In fact, we were just ashamed that we could only cause more trouble when we were in danger. We really want to be of use to you." People who spoke well could be liked anywhere. Charles didn't like flattery, but he appreciated the boy's words. The female classmate who had challenged Charles suddenly shouted, "I don't believe it! I don't believe him! He must be the one who caused this danger!" As she spoke, she rushed toward the camp as if possessed. Her mind was on the verge of collapse. At that moment, the girl who had given the food and water to the bedraggled man suddenly sat up. She stretched out her stiff hands and grabbed at the girl's thigh. "Ah! Claudia, what are you doing?" the other girl cried. The sudden attack was an overwhelming shock. Before she could even register the grotesque miracle of her companion's resurrection, she tripped and fell to the ground. She lay face to face with the girl she thought had been murdered. Claudia spat something that looked like a mass of insect limbs and tentacles from her mouth. "Ah!" The other girl shrilly screamed. Insectile claws pierced her skin and traced weird patterns across her body. The other students were stunned into silence. They thought that the battle had ended, but fresh horrors seemed to wait around every corner. Holy light technique. Sylvia shot the holy light from her hands at Claudia. However, her attack was too late. The girl had already been killed again by the undulating abominations that continued to vomit from her mouth. Only Charles reacted calmly. He had sensed danger nearby and kept up his guard. He winced at the pain in his right arm. Even after the treatment, the damage from the innate sword energy surge that had exceeded the limits of his body had not yet fully healed. But even at full strength, he wouldn't save this girl. She had already collapsed mentally. She couldn't withstand the pressure of life post-apocalypse and had self-destructed. No one could save her. Letting her die at the hands of this creature might be the best outcome. This monster is called the Insect Claw Zombie. It belongs to both zombie and parasite groups. Charles explained to Alice and Sylvia. All kinds of monsters have the virus of the zombie and various characteristics of insects in their bodies. Even if their heads are destroyed, they cannot be completely killed. The parasites in the body of the zombie will survive for a while, so even after it's been killed, we can't approach it. Alice said, "In other words, we just need to keep our distance?" "That's right." Charles smiled bitterly and gestured at the scene. That might be a little more difficult than it sounds. The bodies of the slain vagabonds and students were slowly staggering to their feet, spitting insect claws and tentacles from their mouths. The remaining 3 students hid behind Charles, white with terror. Doubt and despair tormented them. Even if they had awakened and become superpowered, could they really survive the endless waves of monsters? Alice looked around at the monsters slowly surrounding them. She grimaced and said, "These creatures don't seem to be moving fast. Looks like we can try to retreat." The students agreed with Alice's assessment, but Charles brought them back to Earth once again. Although these monsters can't move as quickly as we can, they won't get tired, even if they walk non-stop day and night. They won't slow down until their mindless stamina runs out. How far can you guys go now? Everyone's heart sank. They had been walking for a day under Charles's strict requirements. Although they had rested a few times during the journey and had been treated by the healing spell, their mental fatigue was overwhelming. They could not hope to compete with the monsters in terms of endurance. Seeing the monsters gradually approaching, the students' faces dropped in despair. The male classmate shouted, "Sir, do you have any extra blades?" The continuous physical and mental torture had finally pushed the boy to the edge of his endurance. He'd been trying his best to dodge and escape, but now he felt he would explode unless he could inflict some damage. Unfortunately, he didn't have any decent weapons, just a wooden stick in his hand. It would be great if he had a knife. Although he might still die with a knife, he could at least take one of these horrors with him. The other male classmate did not ask Charles for anything. Instead, he dropped the iron pipe in his hand and picked up a knife from the ground, prepared for battle. When the female student saw her classmates do this, she clenched the wooden stick in her hand tightly. The 3 of them had been lucky to survive until now, experiencing so much trauma. She remembered that all the people who had lost their composure in the face of danger had died. That was not how she intended to go out. Seeing the 3 students preparing to fight, Charles's heart filled with admiration. Originally, he had thought most highly of Aaron. He hadn't even asked for the names of the others. However, being quick-witted was not the same as being tough-minded, because Aaron had made a stupid choice. Charles had killed him with his own hands. On the contrary, these 3 students, who had always seemed inconspicuous, had actually mustered up the courage to fight under such harsh circumstances. Alice said, Charles, if you really have reached your limit, then you should leave. It has always been you protecting me. Even if you leave now, you do not owe me anything." Charles smiled and said, "Aren't you underestimating me a little?" The three students who were prepared to fight looked intensely at him. They remembered when Charles had sacrificed Pamela. If he wanted to sacrifice someone new, would they be able to resist? As far as they were concerned, fighting with monsters and being killed as a ritual sacrifice were two very different things altogether. Charles guessed what they were thinking and said calmly, "Although it would certainly ease the burden, I don't need a living person as a sacrifice to summon the creatures of Divergence." The three of them heaved a sigh of relief. If Charles was willing to explain something to them, it was an acknowledgement of their worth. It was nice, but even the students could tell Alice had little faith in Charles's ability to prevail this time. Alice knew Charles very well. She knew what his limit was. They had encountered many monsters. Although these monsters were all refined after they were killed, they weren't enough to allow Charles to fully recover. The loss of things like energy and blood still needed to be compensated by rest and food. In addition, Charles's blinding sword that had pierced the iron zombie's skin like paper must have consumed a lot of energy. When treating Charles most recently, she had seen that his arm had not been healed yet. Although the injuries and excessive consumption of energy had not completely exhausted Charles, he couldn't have many cards left up his sleeve. He could summon a helper, but if Charles used it in a battle, he would have insufficient strength to escape should things go badly. However, Charles did have a trump card that even Alice, who had been with Charles from the beginning, did not know about. Z, 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 Z. An insect claw zombie let out a strange sound as it approached the group. Sylvia said, "Master, you shoulder the responsibility of purifying and saving the world. You cannot let anything happen to you in this place." Charles asked back, "Where are you getting this from?" Sylvia answered, "That's what the bishop told us when our church was attacked by monsters." Hearing that, everyone experienced a mixture of anger and pity. This so-called bishop must have used this line to trick his followers into dying. Only a simple and devout person like Sylvia would fall for it. Charles said coldly, "He has fallen. The next time we meet, kill him." Sylvia beamed and said, "Yes, Master." Alice urgently said, "Now is not the time to talk about this. We can't run away from these zombies, so what can we do?" Charles raised his left hand. "These monsters aren't tough enough to force me into a dead end." The tattoo on his left arm shone brightly. A black shadow emerged from it and crept down his arm. It transformed into a black python. Alice was shocked when she saw the python. Charles still had a trump card? Had he not yet reached his limit? Perhaps it didn't matter. There were nearly 30 monsters present. Could this shadow snake really deal with all these terrifying enemies? "Lightning Cadaver Serpent, kill all these monsters and leave no survivors," Charles ordered. The black python stuck out its tongue and suddenly flew toward the body of the nearest insect claw zombie. Its bloody mouth gaped and swallowed it. Seeing that the black python was able to kill the monster so easily, everyone felt flickers of hope. When a person was drowning in a desperate situation, even a straw looked like a lifeboat. Charles frowned slightly and commanded, "Kill first and swallow later. Use the thunder subduing technique." The lightning cadaver serpent's devouring ability was limited. If it continued eating like this, after swallowing a few of the zombies, it would be unable to move and then fall into hibernation. The serpent shot a series of white lightning bolts from its mouth. The lightning bolts struck the zombies. One lightning bolt after another merged into one massive strike and targeted all the remaining monsters. Charles and the others heard the sound of burning. In just a few seconds, all the zombies had been charred black, and then they had fallen to the ground. Everyone was stunned by what they had seen. What was the origin of the shadow python that Charles had summoned? Could this be one of Charles's paranormal abilities? The lightning cadaver serpent slowly devoured the zombie corpses. If it were an ordinary beast, swallowing the corpse of an insect claw zombie would be fatal, as the parasite switched hosts. However, this threat was a joke to the powerful lightning cadaver serpent. After eating the zombies, the serpent coiled around Charles's arm in satisfaction and began digesting its meals. This battle had ended, but the stupefaction on the students' faces did not fade for a long time. Under the powerful assault of the lightning cadaver serpent, All their enemies had been turned into charcoal in a matter of moments. They hadn't even had the chance to resist. Charles used the power of the Essence Talisman to refine all the corpses of the Insect Claw zombies. This practice enhanced one's strength. It couldn't be neglected. One of the male classmates said, "If you have such a powerful pet, why didn't you unleash it earlier? You could have saved more lives." Charles said coldly, "And they would have been squandered all over again." The boy immediately shut his mouth. Alice explained, "It's not like Charles is unwilling to help others. It's just that he has helped too many ingrates. Moreover, if certain people survive, they will only become burdens to him. Since he let you see his final trump card, it means that he approves of you all." The male classmate looked at Alice with a complicated expression. "It's not easy to obtain his recognition." Alice nodded in agreement. The students still wanted to say something, but Alice continued. "Although you may think Charles is cruel, he's more reliable than those people from the gym, or Aaron pushing his classmates into a mob of monsters." The students found themselves unable to refute Alice's words. Compared with those who only cared about running for their lives after encountering danger, and who were willing to sacrifice their companions, Charles's bottom line was much higher. At the very least, Charles could protect those around him. In his exacting way, Charles was actually a good person. Although the impression of Charles's decisive killing still cast a shadow over their hearts, after calm analysis, they finally decided to stay with him, because they could find no safer place than behind him. Seeing through their thoughts, Charles said, "Those who rely on someone else's protection to survive are not qualified to stay by my side. Since you have proven that you have the courage to challenge danger, I will teach you power beyond that of ordinary people. Although you will not be as strong as a paranormal, you can at least survive." Hearing Charles's words, everyone's eyes lit up. They had been coveting such power for a long time. They had never thought that they would have such an opportunity. After Charles refined all the corpses, he threw over a dozen medicinal crystal cores to Sylvia and said, "After purification, divided equally with Alice." Then he came to 3 students and asked, "What are your names?" Regarding the names of the deceased students, he did not care at all. However, since these 3's fighting spirit had emerged, he did them the honor of asking, "My name is Tommy Schrader." "My name is Hugh Weatherby." "My name is Tina James." Charles patted each of them on their shoulders. "From now on, I'll teach you the cultivation method of power artists. Now your bodies have reached the limit of fatigue. You can use this time to cultivate for the greatest effect." Under Charles's wisp of origin energy, they quickly passed the initial stages and began to strengthen the origin energy in their own bodies. Just as Charles had said, their bodies were now extremely thirsty. During cultivation, thunder energy surged into them like a spring, making them feel sated. Once you feel your body has reached its limit, stop immediately. Don't force it, or you'll explode. It's not easy to obtain this kind of strength. Don't ruin your future with greed. The greatest threat on the cultivation path of a warrior was not laziness, but greed. If one were to cultivate recklessly because of greed for power, going berserk would be the gentlest outcome. He had suffered such a loss in his previous life. Seeing Charles's serious expression, the 3 also grew serious. Now that Charles had won them over, no matter what he said, they would listen to him, especially anything that concerned their lives. After teaching the 3 of them the cultivation method, Charles began to refine the origin energy that he had just absorbed. He was only a sliver away from opening the Essence Talisman. When he did, his strength would make another leap. After refining the origin energy, he brought Alice into the tent. The day's work had ended, and it was time to rest. Alice used water magic to clean the tents. A wretched mob had been living here. If she did not remove the smell, she wouldn't be able to stay in them. Just as Charles was about to take Alice in his arms again, she blushed and said, "Wait a moment." Then, to Charles's confusion, she pulled Sylvia, who was at a loss, into their tent. Alice said, "I know you have been coveting her for a long time." She blushed and added, "I don't want to be wobbling every morning when I try to walk. If you want to screw someone silly, then screw her." Charles asked with a wicked smile, "Do you have any doubts about my ability?" Alice said with a red face, "No." Charles's smile widened. "Then why do you think one is enough?" "Oh, jeez." Alice rolled her eyes. Charles pulled Alice closer to him. Hearing the noises coming from the tent, the three students found it hard to fall asleep. Tommy mustered up his courage and said to Tina, "You've seen the world now. We may die at any time. Have you experienced everything you've wanted to?" Tina's face showed some hesitation. Tommy continued, "He does not like you. Even if he did, he would not choose you." Hugh entered their tent. Having overheard their conversation, he said, "That's right. I don't know when I'll die. I might as well enjoy myself while I'm still alive. That way, I won't have any regrets." As they spoke, the two of them looked at Tina. Persuaded, Tina nodded her head in agreement. In any case, her looks could not compete with Alice's and Sylvia's. If Charles didn't touch her, she might not have the chance to be with any other man again. She sighed and closed her eyes. The next morning, Charles's exhausted group were lured from their tents by an irresistible aroma. The three students' eyes lit up when they smelled the fragrant stew in the pot. "Are we going to eat?" they asked. Although bread could be eaten with fruit, there was no fragrance like steaming hot food. People only knew how to cherish something after they lost it. Charles pointed around them and said, "Before you eat, look at this." The students' faces turned pale. There were a few dead zombies lying on the ground. The zombies from last night had been either devoured or refined by Charles. These zombies were new. That could only mean one thing. The previous night, zombies had passed by their camp, and Charles had quietly dealt with them. Tommy said nervously, "Sir, I'm sorry. We were also... Anyway, we were too careless. We had to trouble you to help us." Charles stirred some things into the pot and said, "I don't blame you. You guys have too little experience. It's normal that you don't understand how things are. You can learn. But if you guys can't get with it or maintain the proper attitude, then I'll let them have you." At the end of his speech, a strange smile appeared on his face. The three of them felt a chill. They quickly said, "We will seriously study." Before, lessons had been a joke. If they did not listen seriously in class, it had affected them very little. But if they didn't listen seriously when it came to survival lessons, it would cost them their lives. Charles threw a box of pills to Tina and said, "These are contraceptives. Take them. It's very dangerous to get pregnant these days." Tina's face turned red. She'd been too crazy last night. She'd actually taken on 2 lovers alone. It would have been impossible in the past. However, she found she kind of liked that kind of crazy feeling. The students around her had all died one by one. If they hadn't seized opportunities to enjoy themselves when they could, Tina wouldn't make that mistake. And Tommy and Hugh just ate to relieve their desires. While waiting for the stew to be ready, Charles said, "Many animals have already started to mutate, especially bugs. The degree of change is growing even greater. Although we don't know how much the bacteria and viruses have changed, we must consider that as well." He knew from his vantage of 10 years hence that the bacteria and viruses were evolving, but he hadn't planned to say it out loud. There were some things that only later generations should know. It was very dangerous to leak too much information. Hugh asked, "Then how should we deal with it?" Charles said, "Don't worry too much. The immunity of the human body will also increase. But for safety reasons, when you need water to drink, it's best to boil it first." Normally, it was easier for microscopic creatures to evolve. But now, the evolution of living creatures on Earth no longer depended on the environment, but on vitality. The more subtle a creature was, the less vitality it absorbed. But this did not mean that they should not be wary. After all, there were parasites in the water, and as time passed, there would be more of them. Why would people kill for the sake of a bottle of water in the future? Because what they lacked wasn't just water, but clean water. They nodded seriously. This was common sense for survival in the post-apocalypse. Even if they didn't know how long they had to act as if they could live for a long time. Although they were prepared to lose their lives at any time, if they didn't have hopes or expectations for the future, then what was the point of living? What Charles didn't say was that after using light powers to purify food and water, most of the harmful elements would be removed. Why else was Sylvia the resident cook? It wasn't because of her culinary skills. After a few seconds of silence, Charles said, "It's better to say some things clearly up front. For example, I don't expect you to be very loyal." Hugh quickly said, "We must follow you closely." "Yes, we will be loyal to you," Tina echoed. "No need to talk like that. You're not from some feudal society. Charles waved his hand dismissively. He had seen too many betrayals. Even if he could kill every traitor, the psychic losses caused by betrayal could not be compensated. Therefore, preventative measures were more advisable than punishment after the fact. Most betrayals were motivated by greed. He was giving them precautionary measures. I only hope that when you change leaders, you will consider 3 things. The first is how much you can benefit. Don't trust their promises. In the post-apocalyptic era, no one knows if you have a future. What you can get right now is the real deal. The 3 of them were silent. Charles continued. The second is to think about the consequences of offending me. If you want to change leaders, you must at least change to a stronger one. Someone who could crush me. The 3 of them couldn't help but think of the lightning cadaver serpent on Charles's arm. Crushing Charles? They thought that this was impossible. Charles said, "Third, think about your future. Think about how you will live after mutiny. Is it better than following me? Live a better life. If you decide to betray me after thinking through these 3 questions, it can only mean that I have failed. That's all I have to say." He stirred the stew again, then said, "All right, breakfast is ready."